The world. Welcome to Bilateral, a series of virtual fireside chats about transforming global governance, hosted by the Coalition for the UN We Need, or C4UN. My name is Ishaan Shah. I'm an analyst at the Coalition, or C4UN, and will be your host today. Please share your reflections on 30 years since the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action was adopted, the progress and challenges that we're experiencing, and how do we keep the spirit, the legacy, the energy of Beijing alive moving forward.
First of all, to say Rosa Lizarde with the Feminist Task Force. I serve as Vice Chair of the NGO CSW New York, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the CSW revitalization effort under the Advocacy and Research Group of NGO CSW. Our group has focused on CSW revitalization as developing priority recommendations for the CSW. We usually develop recommendations for the priority theme, but because we're reviewing Beijing, Beijing Plus 30, we're reviewing the Beijing Platform for Action with the 12 critical areas of concern and other emerging issues. It's a wide scope. So we decided we need to really refocus on CSW revitalization. Plus, this is so key as we review the 30 years since Beijing. And it's becoming even more important because of the geopolitical landscape that we are seeing developing within the world and the UN in particular. This CSW revitalization mandate that came out of the Pact for the Future, as many of you know, has been put into the under the purview of the president of ECOSOC, and it's going to be a fast process. It has already started and will go through the beginning of July. With the hope, as we understand from the co-chairs, Ambassador Maitin and Ambassador Mokawa from Ireland and Botswana, respectively, that they will have an outcome for around the HLPF. So it's a quick process. I want to highlight that for the CSW meeting for colleagues who are engaging there, and I think in person and also online, there will be 2 official meetings on CSW revitalization. And those meetings should be on UN TV as well. And the first one is on the 13th. I'll put the times in the chat. And then the follow-up on the 18th. So they'll have one the first week and the second week. And it's really important to engage in not only as civil society in writing statements, but also in person and engaging with member states, because this is a process that is new. And there's a lot of shifting ground. And from what we understand, there are, some member states who are, in a big learning curve, and they may be able to, shift with influence and input from civil society. The co-chairs have been very welcoming to civil society. They had an open consultation just about a week and some ago, where they invited civil society to engage. We were able to provide inputs at that session, and we hope that we can also provide inputs into the intersessionals, into the process that's coming pretty much right after the CSW, where they will be reviewing and discussing and negotiating. If I can just take a couple minutes and review what NGO CSW has done. We've developed 9 recommendations for CSW revitalization, and we've divided them into two parts, which is process and stakeholder engagement, and then content, which coincided with what the president of ECOSOC, Ambassador Ray from Canada, requested. We had already been working along those lines. So the first three we highlight process. And the first is really to require effective accountability from CSW stakeholders, highlighting the critical gaps between the Commission's ambitious recommendations and the political will to implement them. So everybody, we all know and understand the issue of accountability, but we really want to ensure that in this process, it addresses clear and measurable time-bound commitments, and it removes obstacles to gender equality. Two, we really want to promote the local, national, regional, and global collaboration, and push for more linkage with UN gender mechanisms such as CEDAW, the Women, Youth, Peace, and Security process, and UN Special Rapporteurs, and also the previous CSW agreed conclusions and Beijing reviews. And third, we really want to highlight the critical role of civil society within this process and advancing gender equality and the rights of women and girls and all their diversity. And then in terms of content, we conducted a survey last year with our constituency of the NGO CSW New York. And this went out to over 40,000 in our communications. We received over 600 replies to this survey, and the majority recommended that violence against women and gender-based violence be mandated as a standing item for review at every CSW. And that came up very clear, and that's our fourth recommendation. The fifth recommendation, also overwhelming, to mandate women-empowered decision-making as a standing item for review. Sixth, we recommend mandating women in armed conflict as a CSW priority thing, especially looking at what is happening around the world currently. Seven, we wanted to recognize the emerging issues such as artificial intelligence, STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and math, cybersecurity, ethics, and safety impacting women and girls. Eight, we call for addressing the intersectional impact of the climate crisis and disasters, specifically with regard to certain issues: food, water, energy, air, insecurity, health, economic, environmental impacts, trafficking, and population displacement. This is really looking at what's happening in current times. And nine, we call for prioritizing women and girls' poverty, seeing that has been increasing over the years, and addressing and reversing economic and financial gender biases, and mandating inclusion in leadership and financing. We know that there's so much more to this agenda that we could really focus on. And we salute the other organizations and networks and coalitions that have developed their own CSW revitalizations. For us right now, these were the priorities. Now, this is a changing process and there's room for inputs. We understood from the COFAX that there will be an open process coming up. We've yet to receive the email or the place where we can send that, but that is for everyone to provide input. We encourage you to endorse these, to use these as a basis for developing your own, or to build on them. And if there are any questions or comments, I can take them in the chat. But thank you so much, Ishaan, for this opportunity. I think that when I first read about this Bilateral's platform, I thought, what a great name and what a great idea, because we need to keep elevating the voices of civil society within the UN.
NGO CSW hosts the NGO CSW Forum in the Church Center opposite the UN, with some fantastic events and a great energy and spirit that we need when it comes to this issue. Rosa, just very quickly in 30 seconds, one final question to you is what is your call to action for those listening as we head into Beijing Plus 30?
Call to action is do not feel defeated. There's a lot of pushback, but we need to continue to mobilize, organize, and raise our voices within all of these platforms, all of these spaces at the UN.
We've spoken a lot about CSW revitalization and the future of CSW, but I want to just take it back to 1946, when the commission was first started, and then 49 years later, we had the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action in 1995. Soon-Young, why is the Beijing Declaration important? Why does it matter to us?
You know, I'm going to take you even back again, we can, because we have forgotten that Beijing Plus 30 is also the UN Women's Conference's 50. So we started in 1975. This is for some of those who don't quite know the history, so you will bear with me. 1975, Mexico City. Can you imagine that the president of that conference was the Attorney General of Mexico, a man, that only half the delegations were headed by women, and that we had no ministries of women's affairs. There were no such things at the time. That was under discussion. 1980, we introduced CEDAW, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. 5 years later, we had the wonderful Nairobi conference with the Nairobi Forward-Looking Strategies, when grassroots women from all over Africa finally joined us, and we resolved this tension that was happening between so-called northern feminists and women from the feminists from the South. And then 1995, I was, in fact, one of the organizers of the NGO Forum. At some point, we expected like 10,000 people at the most. And our computers crashed when we reached 30,000, literally crashed. And so we had to raise money to retrieve our data. We had to work out a new plan with the All China Women's Federation, who was our counterpart in China, to move the venue from Beijing to Huairu in order to have our NGO forum there. So with all of this, what I have seen in the development, what I want to say is the Beijing Platform for Action was all of these processes that started in Mexico, that came up, picked up each time some progress, some important element of what needed to go into a policy document. So 189 countries did sign on to the Beijing Platform for Action. And as you know, there were a lot of things that happened afterwards, some of which were visible and some which were not visible. And so what I want to say about planning a conference, if you ever have a Fifth World Conference, what's really important is for what happens before the conference, the regional meetings, the consultations, the sort of thing that the wonderful organization that Ishaan and I belong to, the Coalition for the UN We Need, we are so aware and so focused on the regional process coming into the global process. So it's from 1975 leading up to 1995 that we see momentum happening, we see growth. And then, of course, what's happened, is that people took that platform for action, which is not a legally binding document. Ishaan, wouldn't you agree? Like, nobody quotes it in law.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
So, but people have stood on it as consensus, as global consensus. One outcome from that was very direct was the campaign that I'm involved with called Cities for CEDAW, which grew out of that because a group of women came back to the United States and said, we really need to do something after that. And so they started the idea of bringing CEDAW to the municipal level in San Francisco in 1998. And now today, more than 10 years later, we have a very vibrant campaign in the United States covering 80 million people with 62 jurisdictions. So that's the sort of visible part. But quite frankly, we don't have an accountability mechanism. If someone wants to set one up, that would be great. Maybe Rosie and the NGO CSW want to do that. But what happened actually afterwards? We have no real picture of that. Wouldn't you agree, Ishaan?
Yes, yeah.
And I see Dubravka is here, so she's going to answer all the other questions about CSW revitalization. But I'll just finish by saying the invisible part. What I saw happening as we look at the history of the UN Women's Conferences since 1975 is the invisible part. And that is the growth of an international feminist culture, an international feminist consciousness, which the UN helped build through those conferences. And I would say we would not have the kind of coherence of goals. We would not have women from Toledo, Ohio, supporting women from Nigeria on FGM issues, for example. And we would not have people from Colombia supporting women from Denmark on a number of issues. So we have an international women's movement which grew out of those conferences. And I would say that the policy documents that came out of them, we can stand on them now. We should stand on them more, but we need to bring them in line with CEDAW.
Just to start, why is the Beijing Declaration important? And why is it important that we're reviewing it 30 years later at CSW 69?
I would like to start by going back to something what Sun Yang mentioned before, related to Beijing Platform for Action as a non-legally binding policy CSW that is coming next week. So it is very important to mention that this comprehensive policy document, but with respect to its legally binding nature, we have to know that in that document, there are many parts of the document that are reproducing CEDAW Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women that is legally binding and that is ratified by 189 states. What means that when you have the specific paragraph in CEDAW Convention that is calling for all states to establish principle of equal rights between women and men and to work towards realization of that principle. So this is legally binding for all state parties to CEDAW Convention. But we have the same paragraph in the Beijing Platform for Action, what means that those states that have not ratified the CEDAW Convention, they have political obligation also to implement the same standard. It is double for those that have ratified CEDAW Convention because now they have CEDAW and Beijing jointly, and for those that have not ratified, they have this political commitment. What means that at the global level, we have more or less universalization of commitments that we have in CEDAW Convention now at the level of a Beijing Platform for Action. And then what is the key issue is implementation of those principles, implementation of all those areas of concern related to discrimination against women and girls, violence against women and girls, and all areas covered by Beijing Platform for Action, and also many of them are covered by UN CEDAW Convention. So we have to see that in Beijing Platform for Action, after 1995, Commission on the Status of Women was mandated to follow up implementation of that policy document. And this is intergovernmental monitoring. So the idea was to have each year examination of specific topics and every 5 years full review of what is happening with respect to implementation of the Beijing. But only first review that happened 5 years after Beijing in the year 2000 was outcome document by the CSW. That was Beijing +5. And that document was specific because it contained the idea that we needed indicators, time frame, how to achieve specific recommendations from Beijing Platform for Action. At that time, in the year 2000, I was chairing Commission on the Status of Women for 2 years. And I remember after +5 document, I was really hoping that we are going in right direction, because, for example, in that Beijing +5 document, we have a target that in the year 2005, we need to eliminate all discriminatory laws against women in all parts of the world in 2005. And now we are in 2025, and we still have discriminatory laws, discriminatory policies, and we do not have this kind of mechanism that will reveal each year what is still precluding women from enjoying their rights in different parts of the world, and how we are changing those laws and instruments. So CSW wasn't trusted to do this intergovernmental monitoring, but on the other hand, CEDAW committee was entrusted to monitor implementation of a Beijing Platform for Action as an expert body. So it is in a Beijing Platform for Action as a specific paragraph that is calling CEDAW committee when it is examining reports from state parties to also examine implementation of Beijing Platform for Action when this is relevant for implementation of CEDAW Convention. So we do have two monitorings, one at expert level done by CEDAW committee, and here we can, through periodic reports, monitor every 5 or 6 years what is happening in different states. And then we have political monitoring done by CSW, with the idea that we should be able also to see this type of progress with respect to implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action. But unfortunately, CSW was not entrusted or equipped with tools to really show up each year and each 5 years what is really going on, and how to encourage countries to do something that would really be focused on implementation of recommendations from Beijing. For example, policies like CEDAW for cities, for example, establishment of Femicide Watch, specific national body that is focusing on prevention of femicides and collection of femicide data. Those are mechanisms that are showing progress, that are showing how we are really coming close to ideas from Beijing. And now we are reaching a point when at the UN, in the Pact of the Future, it was recognized that we need to start with revitalization of the Commission on the Status of Women. And I hope that states will look at different options that should be examined, because Pact of the Future is calling for examination of different options with respect to revitalization. The Pact is calling for participation of all stakeholders, what means governments, non-governmental organizations, academic community, and all others should be involved. It should be very huge participatory process. I also hope that mechanisms like CEDAW committee and Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Working Group on Discriminatory Laws, UN independent mechanisms, but also regional independence mechanisms, because we need many ideas to see how non-governmental organizations, how all those that are at the national level playing very important role with respect to implementation of Beijing Platform for Action and CEDAW Convention can play important role during the session of the CSW, what is not the case now. But it seems that there is a nice opportunity that we will look into the mandate of the CSW, because the mandate of the CSW, and this is very important to recognize, when CSW was established in 1946, and here it is also good to know that at the beginning, when UN started with women's rights policy and mechanisms. At the beginning, it was subcommission on the status of women that was established under the UN Commission on Human Rights. But subcommission on the status of women in its first report to the ECOSOC Economic and Social Council requested an upgrade to full-fledged status of Commission on the Status of Women, what was granted. And then it was in 1946, but at the next session in 47, they requested measures for protection of women's rights, but also to have possibility to recommend measures for realization of the principle of equal rights between women and men. So it was focused on implementation, and this is extremely important part of the mandate. And after that, if we look at the role of the CSW was the key intergovernmental body that was specifically focused on women's rights, and it produced the different legally binding instruments on different areas related to women's rights, like political participation, rights to marriage, and so on. But later on, in 79, a convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women was drafted by CSW. And that was recognition of idea that many causes of discrimination against women are sharing the same roots, and we need to have a framework if we want to eliminate different forms of discrimination and violence against women. So after elaboration of CEDAW, on the elimination of all forms of violence against women. This is another instrument specifically focused on violence against women, but this is not legally binding one. So now we are looking also at possibility to upgrade this declaration on the elimination of violence against women into legally binding instrument, but as a specific optional protocol to CEDAW convention that would be focused on different policy measures needed for elimination of violence against women. I think that this is just the beginning of the process, and 4 special rapporteurs, 3 previous and current special rapporteur on violence against women, are calling for elaboration of optional protocol on violence against women. But to make it a little bit shorter, CSW is now, if we look at past of the CSW and what is CSW doing now, we are seeing that mandate is huge, comprehensive, and giving CSW many possibilities. But in reality, CSW is not using this mandate. In reality, CSW is focusing on a specific topic that is then and this is not an implementation-oriented tool. So, for example, at each session of the CSW, all those non-governmental organizations and government representatives and members of the parliament that are coming in, they are not able to participate in those negotiations, and they are not able to see what is happening in different parts of the world, to have clear understanding what are key issues of women today in different countries, and what are key concerns, and what are those measures and good practices that should be used, because they need to be equipped after the CSW to have some new tools to go back home and to be able to use them, to change realities, to see and to present at the next session what happened. So I hope that we will have at this session good overview of what happened from Beijing up to now, Beijing +30, but that we will also focus on real revitalization of the Commission on the Status of Women and its role in implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action, and also those additional tools that are needed, indicators, data, specific measures that are implemented, that will really focus on implementation. It's implementation time. Implementation is key in front of us.